This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Kathy Oneto on the show. She is an executive life coach, speaker, and a lot more than that. And we're going to talk today about her company. She's the founder of Sustainable Ambition. We're going to talk about her book, Sustainable Ambition, as well, and the podcast that she hosts. But before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about how she got to where she is in her career. So anyway, with all that being said, Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and what is Sustainable Ambition and how you came to be the founder of this.
Yes. Well, I've had over a 25-year career at this point. I started my career in consumer packaged goods brand management. And in the end, through that career, worked on both the client and agency sides. I also worked in big companies. I started my career at Clorox, but I also worked in entrepreneurial environments as well. I joined an incubator out of Clorox, helped co-found a natural food startup. And now in my second act, I've taken all of my experience over that time. I have a portfolio career at this point, and I do a combination of strategy consulting work and transformation work, as well as work on sustainable ambition, as you said, and work as a life work strategist and coach, facilitator, and speaker. And so sustainable ambition is really, if I focus on the book and what the book is about, it's really for people who are ambitious, but not at all costs, and are looking for a better way to pursue all that they want to pursue in life and work, but do so in a more sustainable fashion, not end up in this getting overextended, overexhausted cycle that many of us can find ourselves in. And so I like to, talk about the fact that I don't love the term work-life balance. We can talk about that. I support what I think everybody is wanting to achieve around work-life balance, but I don't think that it serves us in terms of a term, in terms of us actually reaching that. And I think that what we're really needing is a way for us to help resolve the conflicts we feel around all that we are trying to achieve and accomplish, or all of the experiences we want to have across both life and work. And so I point people towards a method to help us resolve some of those conflicts.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm definitely interested in that because I know me, especially when I was earlier in my career, I didn't have a concept of, where work ended and where life began, and I was very ambitious. So I wanted to do more and, become successful, whatever that means at work. And, I got myself into this habit of working really, really long hours and not focusing on family as much as I probably should have early on. And then I remember, it was like a hard quit because I was talking to somebody and I forgot who, but they pointed me towards the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, and by Tim Ferriss. I read that, and in there he talked about like what would happen if you just don't do it. If you just don't, and it just happens. And he talked about how like if you had less hours, you would still get the work done. And I tried to test that theory, so I went back and went to my boss and told him, hey, I'm leaving work between 5 and 6, and I'm not going to check email when I get home. I'm going to focus on the family. I said, but after my kids go to bed around 8 o'clock, I'll just check in, and if there's an emergency, I'll jump on it. If not, everything will wait till tomorrow. And he was just like, I don't know how that's going to go, but everything was fine. And I've never gone back on that. Like that's just been my life ever since. But what is your take on this and how people get stuck in this, I don't know if it's a habit of working too much?
Well, I think that first off, what you're describing is a very normal thing. And I think part of the reason we get stuck in it is there is this ideal worker norm that is embedded in our work cultures. And that suggests that working more all the time is what is going to be rewarded and is going to get you the results, right? So I think part of it is that we are humans who are impacted from our social cues and everything around us. And so we can fall into these norms because it's what we think we are expected to do.
Right.
And everybody else around us is demonstrating that behavior as well. So we're just copying them. And so I appreciate what you did, which is it takes courage to do that because it requires us to go against the norm and fight those norms. And I think I appreciate what you did because sometimes, I think where we can get into danger with this is that I don't believe that, hard work is bad. I also think we can get into some challenge when we think that we always have to hold to these very hard and strict boundaries between life and work, or the fact that, No, I said I'm always leaving at 5:30. Guess what? Sometimes emergencies happen at work,
Right.
so like I appreciate what you just said, which is like, hey, I'm going to check back in at 8. I'll make sure nothing's burning. And if nothing's burning, it can wait, right? But if something's burning, guess what? You better get on it. Like if
Right.
there's a crisis and, something's happening and there's been a security breach or what have you, and you're responsible for that, then guess what? All hands on deck. And so I think we need to be a little bit more clear on like, where do we need to be firm and where do we need to flex? There's certainly some more I want to say about like kind of how do we manage our effort, but I want to pause because I've been going for a bit here, John.
So yeah, so I was thinking back to like while you're talking, I was thinking about we talked about where those boundaries have to be and how flexible you need to be, and it reminded me of a time where we did have like an issue, and you had to jump back in and work on it, but because you've you know not had to jump back in so many times, life outside of work, your family life and stuff, people are a lot more respectful of that and allowing you to get back in and realizing that, your family's always first, but whenever this thing is, this is the job that provides for my family. So I got to make sure I don't lose that and jump back in. So I think that's one of the important things to realize that like, you have to be flexible and fluid with some of these boundaries and understand, what the impact is.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's where we can get into trouble is when we think that we need to be firm all the time.
Mhm.
And then again, we can just end up getting really frustrated, right? When there's any infraction against that. But I do think it's important to, in many cases, just recognize, okay, when am I going to be firm around this? And when do I need to be flexible? Or when am I open to being flexible around some of our boundaries?
So you mentioned something about not liking the term work-life balance, and I'm curious: is it like the work/life balance or the work-life balance?
Yeah, good question. Well, here's why I don't prefer it. One, there's a couple of reasons. One is that the headline is that my concern is that it sets the wrong expectations for people.
Right.
So one is that balance makes you think that things are always going to be in equilibrium and that it's always going to be 50-50.
Mhm.
And that's rarely, if ever, the case. Most of us, especially if you're ambitious, you're going to be slightly out of whack, or one side is going to pull you in either direction. And the reality is life is dynamic. And so, we always need to be adapting and adjusting and attuning to our current context. The other is, which you and I have been already talking about, is that the term makes us think that there should be hard boundaries between life and work. And the reality is, especially today, given how much many of us like and prefer to have flexible work hours and when and where we work, there's even more blending. And, work is not separate from our life. Work fits into the vessel of our life. And I believe work is a meaningful contributor to a happy and fulfilling life. Most humans want to contribute to something and feel like we matter. And our work is one way of doing that. And the final reason I don't like that specific term is that it puts work first. And I think the fact that it even puts work in front. And so I like to talk about life work sustainability because, life, it should come first in terms of how you're thinking about it. Again, like I said, work fits into the vessel of your life. So are you clear on what's important in your life? Are you clear on how your work contributes to your life and the vision that you hold for your life? Things of that nature.
Yeah, I really like that you flipped that and went to life work sustainability. And I think we all have like ebb and flows. You talk about the balance where, like early on in my career, I worked a lot more about work to try to build up that base. And then after kids came, then it kind of shifts more into family because now you have, sick kids, you have, plays at the school or something like that. And right now my kids are all in sports. So it's just sports, sports, sports all the time. And so you kind of have to balance out that activity and realize that like right now I'm in a season where it's going to be more kids things. And now once summer comes and sports are done and the kids are at home, then it's probably going to shift more to work time, and go back and forth as time, allows, I guess.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I talk about in the book, which is, I talk about my method being about, you can find sustainability at the intersection of finding your right ambitions at the right time, at the right effort, with the right effort. And so that element is what you're talking about, I think about as right time. Like, what is
Mhm.
right for this season in my life? And when I use the term right, sometimes people that can trip people up because they might think that there's a right or a wrong. And what I really mean is what is right for you. It's a very personal thing that people have to determine, what season, that's exactly what you're saying. What season of life am I in? And what does that mean in terms of what my values are and how I'm prioritizing those values? Your values might not shift across the course of your life, but how you might be prioritizing those values might shift and change. And so that's why it's a very dynamic thing. And I think paying attention, I appreciate what you just said too. It's like, it's not just season of life, it's also season of the year, right? Like things
Yes.
can evolve and change depending on what's going on. And may require that you, like I said, be adaptable in those moments. And I think what I invite people into is just to become more consciously ambitious. I think oftentimes we just fall into the norms and we start to follow those things around us as opposed to checking in and kind of saying, well, what do I want? What is important to me? How do I connect what I'm doing in my life to what truly motivates me, what's meaningful to me? Am I really clear on what's important in my life now and how work fits into that and that context, and even what I want out of my work now? And then am I really being discerning about where I'm putting my effort? And then importantly, this is the part I said earlier I wanted to come back to, like in terms of, I think, what we sometimes miss around managing our work and our life and the amount of effort we're putting in is like, are we really being discerning about how we're sustaining ourselves and making sure that we actually have a plan to do so?
Yeah, I think that's really good. And what are some of the tips or tricks or habits that people should get into to become more sustainable, like with their work or the things that they're doing? Because I know for me, like burnout's a real problem. People get burned out, and I found ways to mitigate and reduce my burnout. But I'm curious of what methods that you had.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll focus. So, I mean, I do think about the method holistically, which is on some level, it's like it is getting clear on like, okay, what am I motivated? And, where do I want to really put in my effort? What motivates me around the activities that I'm pursuing? Am I being choiceful and focusing on what's important to me and what matters to me most now? Those two things are still pretty critical to help you manage your effort over time. But in terms of right effort, a few of the things that I point people to is, I think about a sustaining plan around the idea of restoring, protecting, and supporting your effort. And part of what's embedded in this as well is learning to pace yourself. So pacing is an important strategy that I lean into, both in terms of, I talked about that from a right time perspective, but also from a restoration as well as protecting and supporting our energy. And just, I mean, it's a simple thing, John, but you kind of alluded to it earlier, which is, one of the things that I start with people is I have a pause and break blueprint in my book. Like, are you actually clear on when and how you're going to take breaks on different time frames? So when are you taking breaks in a day, a week, a month, a quarter, a year? And I know that sounds so simple, but the thing is, taking breaks is really important. It's really powerful. It doesn't have to take a ton of time when you're taking breaks on a daily basis. But the problem is we often don't take them. We all know the data. People might not know this data. Like Slack did a study of knowledge workers. I think it was a study in 2023. They found that 50% of knowledge workers never take a break during the day. And this was a global study. And so, when we take small breaks during the day, even just 5 or 10 minutes to take deep breaths, allow your mind to wander, go for a walk outside, chat with a colleague, like it has profound impact. It really can make us more productive in the end. It can make
Hmm.
us more creative. It actually does restore us. And so even just make it in a practice to really embed taking breaks. And there's studies that also show that there's a common kind of time period. There's not a definitive answer on this, but it's roughly like 90 minutes to 3 hours, like is the amount of time that you can kind of concentrate heavily without, and do quality work. And so it's just another point that we need to give ourselves breaks through the day. And even just creating a discipline around that, I think can go a long way in supporting people and avoiding burnout.
I love that. And, I've tried lots of different ways to take breaks, and I do different things. And I kind of, again, evolve with how I do it. I can think back about a decade ago, I started using something called the Pomodora technique, where you would work like, 25 minutes straight and turn off email, turn off, Messenger and everything. And then after the 25 minutes, then I would turn it all back on, check my messages, check emails and whatever. And that worked great while I was, more of a individual contributor in that role. And then as I got into leadership and management, I kind of had to get out of that method. But I still have, a system that I use to take breaks. And one of the things, so with I have ADHD, and one of the things that I read this book called Faster Than Normal, where they talk about like how your brain works and different things. And one of the suggestions in there is to exercise, regularly throughout the day, just whether it's just, when you finish a call, do some push-ups or some, something like that. So I've been incorporating that, and I found that like it resets my brain and just makes me be way more productive. Where if I just stop and do like, after every call, do 25 push-ups and then sit back down, it's just like, it's almost like it erased what I was just thinking about before and like resets the slate so I can just start over again. And that's been really helpful. And another way that we take breaks is when I do my one-on-ones with my team, we do walking one-on-ones where we go out and walk whenever the weather, is nice. And that helps because the conversation just changes, versus if somebody comes in my office, it's really like, I don't know, you're in the boss's office, it's all weird, but when you're outside, you're walking around, you talk about other things than work, and, work does come up obviously, but you have other conversations that are less, formal, and it's just a nicer, time.
For sure. Those are brilliant examples. I love those. I think I'm going to adopt the exercise one. Sometimes I often go out for a walk, but I often recognize for myself too that, hey, you have your best ideas when you're out running. Like, so why are you, continuing to kind of wrestle with something? Like, just take yourself out and get those endorphins flowing, right? So sometimes we do really have to pay attention to ourselves. And what I appreciate about what you're sharing too is you do need to both know yourself and test some things out, right? And then also recognize that, things may shift on you. Like something that might have worked for you for some time may not work for you anymore. So I have had in the past a daily meditation practice. I will admit I'm a little out of practice with that right now, and I'm really wanting to get back to it. So I've had my friend create a walking meditation for me because those really resonate with me and work for me. So sometimes we need to try something new to also get us back to some of these common things that can keep us operating at our best on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like the fact that, it's not, you don't have to do the same thing every time. Just try something new and experiment. I always consider like, I told my team this too. I consider like my job an experiment, just a lab, where I practice things and we try things out. And if it doesn't work, realize that you're not the thing. You're not the idea. You're not that thing. It's just something that you're trying, and don't be married to it. If it doesn't work, oh, well, we'll try something else, and move on. And don't get upset about it and don't dig your heels in, just realize like, it didn't work for me. Let's try something different, and I think that's,
Yeah, that's
fun.
such a brilliant invitation on all of it, right? I mean, because that just creates that psychological safety very much so, right? In a way, it's kind of like, I actually can take some risks here. I can try some things out and I'm not going to get penalized for that. And I love bringing the term experimentation. I do innovation work as well. So we talk about prototyping, and when you start to create prototypes and just think about, hey, I'm just learning, there's nothing wrong here if it doesn't end up working out. It's going to push me in the right direction, right? With what information I learn.
Yeah, and I think letting people know that, because a lot of times you feel like if you have an idea and it fails, it doesn't work out, then you feel like you have to make this thing work out, otherwise you're a failure. But if you separate yourself from that idea and realize that like I'm not the idea, it's just something that came out of my mouth or whatever, and it didn't work out, then I'll just try something different, and I'm not a failure. I'll just put my energy somewhere else, and it helps you let go of the bad ideas quicker, I think.
I think that's right. Yep.
So when it comes to you talked about taking breaks, and we've talked about short-term breaks. What about long-term breaks, like taking vacations and weeks off? What's your stance and thoughts on how often? Or I know there's never one size fits all, but what is a good cadence to get into? So that because I've had some people, I've had a guy that worked for me that after like 3 years of him never taking a day off, I'm like, dude, you got to take some time off. Like this is just not
Yeah.
cute. But in his, in his generation, it was more like a prideful thing to not take days off
Mm,
work. And his
right.
industry and generation, it's just not for me. But just
Yes.
curious your
Yeah.
take.
Well, I think what you're alluding to and pointing towards is, yeah, I think that we do need to take breaks. We're all different, but the reality is, humans are not meant to just keep plugging away at things. You really do need downtime and you do need time to restore yourself. And I think you're right that we're all different, but I don't know if I can set a hard, fast rule. I would encourage people to definitely take vacation every year. It's really too bad that in the United States, there's plenty of data that says like we often do not take all the vacation that we have available to us for those of us who are lucky enough to have paid vacation as part of our compensation packages. So I think it's pretty vital, honestly, to both restore yourself as well as to connect with the people around you, right? And also it's not just downtime. And I think it's really what part of what's important about thinking about restoration is really understanding yourself and understanding what restores you. So we're not all wired the same where, oh, just chilling on a beach is what's going to restore me. Sometimes what restores people is having adventures. Or,
Yes.
I was talking with a friend coming out of the pandemic, and this really hit home where he said, just chilling at home is not what is making me feel good. He's like, I'm realizing in our conversation, like, I need to go out and have conversations with interesting people. Like,
Mhm.
that is what energizes me. So I think knowing ourselves too in that regard is really important. I will just say, I'm going to, John, I know that not all of us have this available to us, unfortunately. I really wish that more companies offered sabbaticals because I personally endorse if we can pull it off taking longer periods of time when we can disengage, and sometimes that's at an inflection point. Sometimes it might be something that you need to negotiate with an employer, but the way that we work these days is really intense.
Yeah.
And so, some of us are in jobs that do really demand a lot of us, do make us stretch, sometimes we aren't always able to put some of these boundaries that we're talking about. And personally, I think like sometimes you can do a hard sprint, but then you need significant downtime to kind of decompress, reorient, etc. So I'm a huge fan of sabbaticals anywhere. And I also think about taking breaks like, again, that's why I think about different time frames. Like I for myself, I now have what I call my soul days, where I try to block at least one day a quarter, where I am doing something that is just fully restorative to me and doing things that just fill me up. So that for me might be even just going for a walk in the park that is close to me, going to a museum in that day, sitting in a coffee shop and letting my mind wander for a period of time. So anything from that to, I've taken 2 weeks where I call it my creative sabbatical, where I'm just going off to a city and kind of wandering and doing personal creative work. So I think, again, not all of us can pull that off, but I think with intention and with planning, those are the types of things that I think can keep us operating our best on a longer time frame.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I think that's I know for me, when I talk about, what's different for different people, one example is we're actually going on a trip, a pretty long trip, I think an 18-day vacation, if you want to call it that. While this episode, we'll probably be on our trip when this episode goes out, most likely. But we're going with some family, and we were talking about what we're going to do in Rome when we're there. And my wife was like, "Oh, we're going to go on a 17-mile, mountain bike trip and go out." And they're like, "What? That's not what vacation's about." And the family's like, "No, we're definitely not doing that. We're gonna relax and have some drinks." We're like, "We're going mountain biking. We're going kayaking. We're going out and having fun." But it's just different people have different, ideas of what is relaxing for them.
Exactly. Yeah, that sounds brilliant to me. Like what you're doing. Like, that sounds like what we would be up to as well.
Uh, but when it comes to what should leaders do to encourage people to take breaks when they have that mindset, like I was talking about earlier, of someone that doesn't, doesn't see the need of taking those breaks?
So, a couple ideas. I mean, one is to think about building team norms around sustainability practices. So, even a leader having a conversation with their team about how can we support each other in better navigating our life work integration. Having an honest conversation about that in terms of what norms do we want to establish as a team, in terms of, for example, when we're going to respond to emails, when we're going to be online or offline. What are the norms in terms of response time? Is it okay for people to be doing the Pomodora method, like you were suggesting, that there's going to be times for quiet work time when people are going to turn off their Slack or whatever system they use and like not be responding to things? Because even that, allowing for deep work could be considered a type of break, right?
Right.
But I think that in terms of getting alignment to some particular breaks, one of the norms that has been documented is around this idea of having coordinated time off that can be really helpful for organizations when it's like, hey, we are all taking these 2 days off. And coordinating that so that people, which might be hard in technology or depending on the function you're in. But if you can coordinate some of those things where you're forcing some breaks where people aren't like, I'm going to have to respond to something, you could even do that as a team. Okay, we are coordinating a break for today, or creating, I think that can start to, I'm just their ideas are now going off in my head as I'm thinking about this, like where it can be like, what if you have a stand up each day that is a forced break, that is not, we're not doing a stand up to talk about something that we are developing. We're doing a stand up to, I don't know, maybe it's your humor break, for the day. But you can create these kind of norms within your team as well, in terms of how are you integrating breaks on different time horizons and periods. I think what you're doing, John, is a brilliant place to start too, which is you cast a shadow as a leader. You are setting the norms. You are a role model. If you aren't taking breaks yourself, that is a signal to your team that you might be telling them to take breaks. But if you're not doing it yourself, they're like, but can I really take breaks? So as a leader, it's important for you to be role modeling these activities or these ways of sustaining yourself as well.
Yeah, that reminds me of one thing. I totally, we talked about expectations and being a role model. I like to check email still in the evening. So that's one thing I'll do. Like be like 10 o'clock at night. I'll pull up my phone, I'll check email. And I've gotten this bad habit of sending emails also. And people would respond. And then I'd have to tell them, like, hey, don't respond. But I never had set that expectation. And now I've learned that there's tools to help me. There's in Outlook, there's this little thing where you can schedule send, and I'll schedule all my messages to go out like at 8 o'clock in the morning instead of, at 10 o'clock at night, or even 6 o'clock at night. I'll be in the evening, and I was like, oh, I need to ask this question, but I don't want to bother them. So I'll schedule it to go out at 8 o'clock in the morning. And that has helped me kind of set boundaries for myself so that I'm not overstepping and, putting pressure on people to respond and be available when I really don't want them to. I kind of want them to take that break, but I was sending them a different message without realizing at the time. So yeah, I think that's good. I've been very fortunate that where I work, we have a company shut down during Christmas, like the whole week of Christmas and between Christmas and New Year's, which has been awesome because the whole company can kind of just take time off. And with technology today, especially with AI tools, there's ways to automate. And, like when I'm on vacation, there'll be episodes of this podcast going out every Friday, whether I'm there or not, just because it's all automated. It's put in, you put in the work up front to put those processes in place so that you can prep episodes in advance and have them roll out and be automated. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing while I'm gone. And, people need to focus more, I think, on those kind of things. When you have, regularly scheduled stuff, you can put automation in place.
Yeah, what you're bringing up for me too is, how do you create those norms and backups, systems when people go
Yeah,
out,
systems.
So even if it's not technology related, you're just making me realize, like allowing people to really be away when they're on vacation and having it be a norm on your team that like, hey, we got each other's back. They're like, we're not going to be bothering you while you are away. That those kind of backups or systems that are in place so that people can truly disengage, like you're describing, is really important.
Yeah, for sure. We didn't really get into a whole lot on the book. So tell me a little bit about the frameworks that you mentioned in your book.
Well, as I shared, the right ambition, right time, right
Right.
effort is the structure of it. But part of what I talk about in the book as well is, where I do start with people is I think we need to rethink how we define both success and ambition. Is part of what's important in terms of creating more sustainable ambition for ourselves. So, oftentimes these days, success is really about those external metrics, and often what is rewarded is, you know more money, more things, working harder, being busy. And so part of leaning towards sustainable ambition is orienting more towards yourself and really what is personally meaningful and motivating to you. So that is a core construct, is making success personal, aligning to your success on your terms, and even defining your personal success metrics so that things become personally rewarding for you is
Mhm.
important. It doesn't have to mean that you completely ignore, because we're human,
Right.
external rewards. And some of us, like myself, I value achievement. And so sometimes we may still seek some of those. But I think if that's the only driver, it ends up at some point not being fully rewarding. And so really understanding, like I said earlier, what is meaningful and motivating to you is really important. The second component is rethinking ambition as well, which is most people, think that ambition, it has a negative context in our society. But I believe ambition is good, but I also think it needs to be sustainable. So I talk about in the book that it's about dialing it in to get it right for you. I talk about this idea that there's a U curve of ambition. We can have too little ambition where we're stagnant, and then you can have too much ambition or where we're constantly over striving, where we start to get into what I call the severe zone. And so how do we dial in our ambition to be just right? And again, for us, this is a very personal thing. But I invite people to also recognize that we often think that ambition is just about work, but really we hold life ambitions as well. And so oftentimes it's kind of may sound silly, but oftentimes when I share that with people, they're like, I can have life ambitions? What? And yet most of us do already have life ambitions. But I think when we orient that way, it invites more opportunity. It allows us to build our identity in a more holistic way. We also talked about earlier how ambition does ebb and flow. And often when our ambition shifts, that can trip people up. And so expecting that your ambition is going to potentially shift, or it might wane at some times. And that's okay and very normal. And then the final thing is just that we often think that ambition is about driving hard all the time. And I believe, like, no, it doesn't have to be about, and we've already talked about that. You really need to allow for your effort to be sustainable, that you are going to be discerning about where you're putting in the effort, but also about how you're managing your effort and restoring yourself, so you can sustain what you want to pursue over time.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think a lot of people need to focus more on those, life ambitions. Some of us call it, bucket list items or something like that. But it really, you can narrow it down smaller than that, because it may just be an ambition to travel more. And an easy thing you can do is put a map up with push pins. Start putting push pins, because when you see them, you're more motivated to, like, oh, I need to go to this place so I can check it off the list. And then you go into making a plan to do that, and that kind of drives you in that direction. So I think that there's little things you can do that are really helpful. So
I think so as well. I mean, I talk with people, and other people share these ideas with me too over time, which is, you can be ambitious about, of course, your family life. You can be ambitious about building community or friendships. You can be ambitious about being a great sleeper, So, yeah, we can be ambitious about a number of different things. And I think being able to open your lens to, oh, what can I, or what do I want to be ambitious about, I think is an invitation. Like I said, to just be more well-rounded, more
mhm.
holistic in how we're shaping who we are and who we want to be in the world.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I definitely think people need to focus more about the life work sustainability model instead of the work life balance model. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
Kathy, this has been a fantastic conversation. How can people connect with you online, learn more about what you're doing, and maybe pick up a copy of your book?
Yeah. Well, people can find me on LinkedIn, of course, but then they can also go to sustainableambition.com. Everything is there. You can find links to the book and other resources at sustainableambition.com/books. People can also find my podcast on all the podcast players as well.
Awesome. And I'll link those all up in the show notes too at geekleader.com. So people can go there and click through from the show notes as well. Again, Kathy, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.